Welcome to Tampa Bay Business and Wealth's virtual Women of Influence. Thank you all for joining us once again. I'm Jason Baker. I'm our Vice President and Associate Publisher and Partner and Juggler and Chief Cook and Bottle Washer, all those fun things, keep the wheels on the bus. We continue to offer valuable content to all of our readers and our audience through the virtual world. Obviously, now that we've been in sort of these crazy times here for the past, can't count how many months anymore. I'm not even going to try to count how many months we've been in the craziness. But the virtual world has been a fantastic way for us to deliver all of that fantastic and valuable content that you all need, that is relevant and very much so pertinent to what is going on right now today. Today is our Women of Influence series, which is designed to bring together women leaders to address issues that are unique to them. As a lot of you know, this is typically a quarterly event that we do that is really live and in person around different venues across Tampa Bay. Today we are virtual in 2020. So we do plan to go back to live events in 2021 when it comes to the Women of Influence series. So keep an eye out for that. Tonight's topic, women's empowerment, seeing creativity differently, produced in partnership with the Dali. We are so happy to have them as a partner on this event with us and offering some really, really valuable content to all of you that are on the call today. As always, I lay out a couple ground rules before we start moving. This one's a little bit different than these virtual events than we've done in the past. Typically, it's a panel discussion. This time we have someone who is much smarter than me that is going to lead our discussion, and you are very much so going to enjoy it. And it gives Bridget a fantastic break to actually do some learning during this call today as well. So ground rules, we will place all of you on mute, obviously, as we roll forward through the conversation to be respectful to our speaker. Speaker view is usually the best way to view these. If you go up top and you click view and you click speaker view, that basically puts whoever is speaking at that time, the main person on the screen in front of you, instead of seeing the Brady Bunch, like a lot of us like to see as we look for each other and say hello. Feel free to chat behind the scenes privately. That's why we leave that open. That's why we do these a little bit differently, so you all can see each other and communicate a little bit behind the scenes and reconnect if you haven't seen someone in a while. Jolynn will be monitoring the chat behind the scenes. So if there are any kind of questions that we have time to get to towards the end, we will try to, but we've got a lot of good content here that we got to get to. So that's why I'm moving very fast today. Stick around afterwards. Feel free to hang out. I know Kim, our main speaker, is going to probably hang out for a little bit to answer any more questions once we're done with the presentation for the day. Grab a glass of wine, hang out with us for a little bit, chat, catch up. It's what we like to do. So with that, just always please remember, be respectful to our speakers, and please do stay on mute. So with that, I'll bring on Bridget. Everyone knows Bridget Bello. She is our CEO and publisher of Tampa Bay Business and Wealth, to take it away.
Thanks, Jason. It is so nice to see all of your beautiful faces. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to our sponsors. Excuse me, sorry, frog in my throat. I was quiet for too long. Jason does a good job of making me be quiet. So he said most of what I needed to say. I think we covered the ground rules and the housekeeping rules. Do submit any questions that you have in the chat box. Jolynn will be monitoring that, and if we can get to it, we will get to it. But we've got an incredible program that I'm convinced is going to be really engaging, and I'm super excited about, for lots of reasons, not the least of which is that I'm not the one doing it. So I get to enjoy it with the rest of you for a change. And I want to make time to make sure that we thank the people who made this evening's program possible. Without our sponsors, we can't do these. And we've got a pretty incredible lineup. So I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to lead with Lynn Heckler. She's the Chief Talent Officer at PSCU. And she's going to tell you why PSCU wanted to be a part of this event this evening. It's not a Zoom until you get to say you're on mute.
Right? The phrase of the year, you're on mute. Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Heckler, and as Bridget said, I'm Chief Talent Officer at PSCU. And we are delighted to be a sponsor of this timely and relevant presentation. PSCU is the nation's largest credit union service organization. So we provide payment solutions to about 1,500 credit unions across the country. And at PSCU, we are deeply committed to improving gender balance. Our women's initiative, SAGE, their mission is fearlessly leading the change in our industry to make gender equality a reality. And I've been part of that for the last 10 years. But like many financial services organizations today, we must continually drive innovation in order to compete in our increasingly competitive financial services space. But we can't innovate without cultivating an environment of true inclusivity, one that embraces diversity of thought along with the traditional dimensions of diversity like age, race, and gender. So today's topic is tremendously interesting to me because it explores an important aspect of diversity of thought, and that is understanding the role of cognitive preferences, how we prefer to process information. I really believe can help us, understanding this can help us create more diverse and high-performing teams in our organization. So thank you to Bridget and TBBW for continuing to shine a light on women of influence in our community and holding sessions like these where we can learn and grow together. So with that, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be sponsoring this event and greatly look forward to our speaker.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We appreciate your partnership very much. Next, I'm going to welcome, Maria del Carmen Ramos. She is partner, immigration practice, co-administrator, and co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Shoemaker. Maria?
Thank you, Bridget. Shoemaker is thrilled to be a sponsor and a part of TBBW's Virtual Women of Influence event. Our law firm firmly believes that empowering women is key to breaking the glass ceiling. For this reason, many years ago, our law firm started what was called the Women Leadership Initiative, that we still have today, and various other programs to help our female attorneys go out into the communities and assume leadership roles with different organizations. I truly, truly believe, and I'm very excited about some of the things that our firm is undergoing as it tries to increase diversity, not only for women, but for all groups in the legal field. And I wholeheartedly embrace our brand, much thanks to Erica Shea's idea that she is Shoemaker.
I love it, and I love your ad campaign where it always features the women in leadership, and we appreciate your partnership very much as well. Next, please help me welcome Teresa Bursey. She's the Executive Director and Branch Manager in St. Petersburg for UBS. Teresa?
Off mute. Thank you, Bridget and Jason. So glad to finally be a part of an event. I feel like we had been talking for such a long time, and right before COVID happened, we were about to sign on for a series of these Women of Influence events. So really happy to be here today and be amongst a lot of really great people here on the call. So listen, as UBS, as the world's largest global wealth manager, we take our responsibility to serve our clients and their families really seriously. And as many of my peers on the call have already mentioned, our dedication to a diverse workforce, putting more women in leadership is continuing to grow. I've been with the firm for 16 years. And have one of the top leadership positions today. So if that doesn't tell you something about the culture that we try and cultivate, I don't know what would. And in 2018, we embarked on a groundbreaking study of US women. And it started with the recognition of two major trends impacting women: increasing life expectancy and the rise of gray divorce. And this means that at some point, 8 out of 10 women will end up alone and solely responsible for their financial well-being. And we did a report titled Own Your Worth, where we went out and we surveyed women of all different ethnicities, backgrounds, same-sex marriage, traditional marriages. And the one stat I want to share today, and you can read on at your leisure, is that still today, with women in leadership, over 50% of women still allow their spouse to take the lead on financial decisions. But yet 8 in 10 of them will end up alone making those decisions on their own. So as we unleash our creative, juices on the call today and think about what's possible and appropriate for the future, there's 5 key questions that we always ask our clients and women and men that we're engaging with. And that is, what do you want to accomplish in your life? Who are the people who matter most to you? What do you want your legacy to be? What are your main concerns? And how do you plan to achieve your life's vision? So if you want to read more about the Own Your Worth report and what UBS is doing as a firm to support and empower women to take their seat at the financial table, I encourage you to go to ubs.com/mymoneymove. Lots of tools and resources, as well as the Own Your Worth report. You can read more, and we're looking forward to a great session today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for your partnership, Teresa. And maybe we can send that link out so that if for people who couldn't write as quickly as they wanted to, we can share that information with them. Well, last, but actually first, because TD has been with us supporting the Women of Influence series from the very beginning. It was actually their idea, and they're the reason that we do this series and couldn't do it without them. Scott Daigle, he is Regional VP for Tampa Bay with TD Bank, and he is one of the very few brave men who are joining us this evening. So thanks for being a part of this, Scott. And he was kind enough to give up his time so that we could get onto the program as quickly as possible. But Scott, we appreciate you, your continued partnership, and your support from America's most convenient bank. So thank you for your sponsorship.
Thank you. On with the show.
All right, so without further ado, a woman whose name I promise not to mess up and probably will anyways. She's our star speaker for this evening. Her name is Dr. Kim Macuare. How'd I do? Oh, I got a thumbs up. That's awesome. She's co-director of Innovation Labs and director of community programming at the Dali. So Kim, take it away.
Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pop up my share screen so we can get this show on the road. Everybody see my screen? I hope.
Yes.
Awesome. So let me get that up. Excellent. Everybody hear me okay as well? Audio's good? Excellent. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the innovation labs at the Dali up front before we get into our reason for being here tonight, because as I was listening to the sponsors speak, it was really heartening because here at the innovation labs, one of the things that we do is we are trying to walk the walk as well as to talk the talk. And that is we are, through our own practices, trying to make innovation a part of what we do. And the Innovation Labs is really key for that, because here we're taking something that the museum has in terms of its art collection, and we're thinking about how does that art collection speak to different kinds of constituencies in different ways. Obviously, we have our museum goers who come in to see the art in more traditional ways, but the Innovation Labs is actually leveraging Dali's art processes and methods in order to spark creativity and push innovation for corporations and organizations. And I was especially happy to see PSCU because I've worked with them a couple of times. I have had a couple of their departments in here, and I know we have a couple of bank sponsors, and I also have a lot of financial institutions who come in here. So I want to really put that out there, that creative thinking is across the board. It's at financial institutions, it's in law firms, it's in science, it's in museums. It's not something that is isolated to a certain area or profession. And right now with COVID, I think that all of us are starting to see, we were a little bit knocked back on our heels by the unexpected circumstance. But the great thing about creative thinking is it's designed to take advantage of ambiguous and uncertain and volatile situations. Welcome to 2020. And so I'm hopefully going to be able to share some things with you today that will let you feel a little bit more empowered in terms of thinking about your own creative process and thinking, and in the way you might think about your team's creative process and thinking. So why don't we go ahead, and I'm gonna get started. So I'd like for you to hover over the bottom of your screen, or the top of your screen at this point, depends on your view. And I'd like for you to open up the chat. Can you open up your chats? I'd like for everybody, I'm going to write check-in here in the chat. And I'm going to divide you into two groups. I want to say people whose last names are A to M is group 1. And then people whose last names are N to Z are group 2. So what I'm going to ask you to do for your check-in is, 2020 has been a rough year. And as we were just talking at the front of the call, we're kind of in election week, and I know people's emotions are all over the place. So what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for people whose last names begin with the letters A to M, I'd like for you to type into the chat 3 adjectives that describe how you're feeling right about now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give people time to type those in, and let's see those responses roll up. So if your last name begins with A to M, okay, let's see what's in here. It's always interesting to see these roll in and see how many patterns that you see. A lot of tired and anxious, but also a lot of hopeful. Okay. Excellent. And now if your last name begins with N to Z, I want you to go ahead and type your 3 adjectives in. COVID fatigued. I think a lot of us feel that way. Okay, everybody get a chance to type in? I'm missing some end of the alphabet people here. Now, the reason that I asked you to do this is we're going to be talking a lot today about this idea of the creative thinking process. But process is really only one part of the equation. A much more important part of the equation is people when you're thinking about creative thinking and creative problem solving. And so at the beginning of any kind of creative endeavor, it's really important to kind of take the temperature of the room and see where people are at, because that's going to impact the kind of creative thinking and creative problem solving that you're going to be able to do today. So I think we got a mixed bag here. We've got some tired, we got some anxious, we got some optimistic, we've got some hopeful, we've got some excited and motivated. So why don't we kind of jump in and see what we can do with this mixed bag of emotions. Now, I hope everybody has a piece of paper and something to write with. It needn't be a full-on notebook or anything. Any scrap that you have handy will do. You just need a piece of paper and a writing implement. And I'm going to ask you, hopefully, to follow a really simple instruction. So does everybody have a piece of paper and a writing implement? Excellent. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to complete this instruction. Draw a sunset. Okay, 30 seconds. Draw a sunset. Okay, So 30 seconds. So if you're interested in your game, I'm not going to make people do this, but if you want to hold up your drawings to your camera, so we can kind of see what we've got going on here. Okay, excellent, excellent. I just want to ask a few questions. So you can go ahead and you can give me a raise of hands, or if you want to tap your space bar and give me the ayes or the yeses, that's also okay. So people who are out there with your sunset drawings, how many people drew a semicircle? Okay. How many people drew a horizon line? Okay. How many people drew rays coming off of the semicircle? Okay. What about water? Okay, maybe trees or mountains, occasional bird. Yeah, so the interesting thing about doing this exercise is that you come to see that people very much have not in their mind when they're drawing a sunset, the idea that they're going to translate a specific sunset, but what they have in their mind is a template for a sunset. And this kind of template thinking really dominates a lot of the thinking and problem solving that we do on an everyday basis. The first time we see or interact with something, our brains really light up all over the place. But every time we are introduced to that phenomenon, less and less of your brain lights up because you start to think that you know what that thing is as soon as you put your eye on it. And so you start to make these snap decisions that are like, oh yeah, I know that thing. Oh yeah, I know that thing. And most of the time that's true. But a lot of the time we get this thing called expert blindness, where we miss things because we assume that we know what we're seeing. And sight's a tricky thing, because if you think about your eyes and you think about what you call seeing, only 10% of the information of what you're seeing is actually coming from your eyes. The other 90% is coming from your brain. And your brain is running on those templates. So what I want us to do is to think about how we might get off of those templates. And that's a really interesting place where Dali comes in. So I'd like for you to go ahead and humor me here. I would like for you to close your eyes. And I would like for you to picture in your mind that very classic genre of painting, the female nude. Okay, every painter, even if it was their art school work, they have a female nude painting. Okay, you got one in your mind? Excellent. Open your eyes and let me know if it looked anything like this. I'm getting some skeptical looks out there in Zoom land. So maybe we could try this one. Did it look more like that? Okay, that's not surprising because this is the kind of classical version of the nude. This is Ang's Grand Odalisque. And what's interesting is that Dali obviously had studied art, was a very accomplished painter, and knowing that this was the tradition of the female nude, chooses to go in a different direction. That is, this is the template, if you will, for female nudes, and Dali decides he's going to break that template. And how and why he does that are kind of what is going to lead us into the rest of our discussion today. So when we're looking here at Dali's painting, you obviously notice that it doesn't look at all like the Ang's beautiful body of the odalisque and the seductive stare of the female model. Here, rather, what Dali is doing is he is taking some of the reading that he had been doing right before he painted this, because Dali has just come out of art school and he has all of this classical training where he has learned to do impressionist painting, post-impressionist painting, cubist paintings, these really classical, almost photorealistic paintings. And he's like, okay, great. I have all of this training, but what's my vision? And so one of the places that he finds the first lens, if you will, to kind of focus his vision is through his reading of Sigmund Freud. And of course, Sigmund Freud has a lot to say about psychosexual development, and especially about the view that Freud had of female sexuality in particular. And this was really the inspiration for this particular painting. So I'd like for you to notice a couple of things here. I'm going to move my cursor. So you will notice that this painting does have, for example, exaggerated sexual features, like this breast with the shadow of the nipple. Here we have the genitalia with the hair, and these kind of overt sexual features of this nude painting are supposed to indicate the attraction principle of the female figure. That is, the female has an erotic charge that attracts the male in Freud's vision. However, of course, since it's Freud, it's not that simple. In addition to the attraction principle, there's also a repulsion principle, because female sexuality is also scary and hard to control. And so if you look here, you'll notice the exaggerated hand. You'll notice up here this small head with these exaggerated teeth. And this is really what Dali is trying to do here, is he's trying to show you a view of feminine beauty and feminine eroticism that is not playing to the template of painters like Ong and other classicists, but that's trying to show you something new about female sexuality. Now, whether you buy it or not, or whether you buy Freud, you know, that's another story. But what's clear is he wants you to see the female nude figure in a different way. He's not just here to say, oh, look, there's a beautiful female body. He's here to say, here's something really interesting about female sexuality. It is both attractive and repulsive. It's both something I desire and something I fear. And that's something he couldn't transmit in the classical template painting. He has to break the template because he has to do that to transmit a new idea. This is also something that he's very revealing of himself in this painting as well, because these paintings that he turns to after his academic career are over are much exploration of his own psyche. And I'd like for you to notice again this exaggerated hand down here. Dali, one of his poses for himself was a figure called the Great Masturbator. And that's because most of what we think we know about Dali's sexuality is that he was autoerotic by the majority. That is, he was fearful of having actual intercourse. So he would masturbate to these sexual stimuli. So it's a very interesting painting, and it's something that isn't beautiful in the sense of the painting that we saw before, but it's something that transmits an idea that couldn't have been transmitted with the classical template. And lest you think that Dali just couldn't paint a female figure, I decided to throw in a few of these for you to see that, you know, he had more than the chops to do it. This is Girl with Curls, back of a girl. Notice very exquisite lines and treatment of skin and hair. Study of a nude, and one of my favorites, young virgin autosodomized by her own chastity. So Dali was more than capable of doing this. But the bather is a choice. And the choice here is to reject the easy kind of template and to break that template. And I really want that to be our guiding light today. And that is, let's see how we can, like Dali, take something that we think we know, and how might we see that through a different lens, just as he applied the Freudian lens to the female nude. So if we can do this, I think we're going to get to a really generative place, because maybe it's because I work in an art museum, but I don't think so. I believe in the creative power of the ability to see something in a different way. Knowing how to look is a way of inventing. in the very act of seeing, we create something. And this is a really powerful thing that you can apply if you're thinking about the problems that you're facing in your organizations, your businesses, or even obviously in our personal lives. And I have a couple of illustrations here of my favorite instances of knowing how to look is a way of inventing. On the left, we have Picasso's bull's head sculpture. Picasso's tooling down the street one day and notices this broken up bicycle on the side of the road. And these two pieces were not together in this way. But as Picasso was observing the broken up bicycle, these two pieces coalesced in his mind in this way to represent this bull's head. And then on the right-hand side, we have this really great photograph from Elliot Erwitt. And photographers probably know better than anyone else that how you look at something creates what you see. And in this case, of course, if we were looking at this photo from any other angle, we wouldn't get the visual joke that she has these gored boobs. And I always love the look on her face because I always imagine her thinking, what is this guy doing? And if she only knew what he was really doing, she would probably have an even sourer look on her face because it's probably not something she would volunteer for. Now, this brings me to the definition of creativity that I want to roll with today. I mean, obviously, if you went out in the street and you asked 100 people, what does creativity mean? You'd get 100 different definitions. But the one that I want to think about today is that creativity is the ability to come up with novel ways of seeing, doing, and being. So just like we were thinking about the template of the sunset, the template of the nude, and how we could re-see those things, I'd like for us to think about the fact that that's really the heart of the creative endeavor at all. That is new ways to see, new ways to do, and new ways to be in the world. One of the problems with that all sounds great, no? You guys are ready to get out your pom-poms and be cheerleaders for like, creativity, yeah, new ways to see, do, be. Is that it would be great if it weren't for the fact that we actually face a lot of barriers in terms of more creative thinking and better creative problem-solving capacities. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of those barriers with you as a preface for thinking about our cognitive preferences discussion. So this is a painting I really love in the museum. And I love this painting as an introduction for this topic because you see these people who are here and they're moving across this bridge and then all of a sudden they stop. And you don't see anything except for the coloration of the sky that indicates any reason why that might be. And I think that the kinds of barriers that I'm thinking about in terms of barriers to our creativity are often the exact same way. They're invisible because they're so much a part of how we think about creativity. And I want to think a little bit about some of those. One that I face all the time is that innovation has a formula. And I get a lot of clients who are like, okay, this is great, innovation, tell me what to do. What are the guidelines? And this is a very tempting way of thinking. And of course, if you Google innovation formula, you'll find plenty of innovation formulae that tell you that if you take knowledge plus inspiration and multiply it by aptitude, you'll get innovation at the end of that. We also have what I like to call the Sudoku mindset, that there's this right way to solve a problem. It's the way that we've always done things. It's the way that we do things in this field. It's the way that this company does things. It's in the handbook. There's a right way to solve a problem. Only some people are creative, such as artists. I get this all the time from people. How many of you work in a company or have ever worked in a company where you have a person or a group of people that they call the creatives? Yeah, the marketing people, the designers, the creatives. You're born with a fixed level of creativity. My friend is just more creative than I am. I'm this glass in the middle and, she's the glass on the left. She's just got more going on in that department than I do. And that's just the way it is. And one of my favorites, creativity is like magic. It just bings out of nowhere, out of the blue. And all of a sudden, you're just full of great ideas. Visited as this gentleman is by the muse. And finally, we have this idea that creative ideas are somehow original. They've never been thought of before. They've made whole cloth out of something that has never existed. Well, I want to push back on some of these a little bit because these barriers actually have very real repercussions, especially in organizations and corporations. And one of these is, if you look at creativity and innovation skill sets, it's actually the most difficult skill to find when you're trying to source workers to do this kind of work. So recruiting people that have these skills, it's the most difficult set of skills to recruit for. And this is going to become a bigger and bigger problem because it is becoming a more important skill as we move forward, not a less important skill. So if you look at the World Economic Forum, back in 2015, this was skill number 10. Now in 2020, it's skill number 3. And it shows no sign of abating. It's actually just becoming more complicated, because if we look going forward at 2022 skills outlook, creativity has now become noticed not just as one single discrete skill, but we're starting to see all of the different areas that creativity and innovation impact. So if we look at this list of growing skills, number 1, analytical thinking and innovation. Number 3, creativity, originality, and initiative. Number 5, critical thinking and analysis. Number 6, complex problem solving. Number 9, reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. Every single one of those is connected to creative thinking and creative problem solving. So it's a huge, huge area, and it's hard for us to source people with these skills. For this particular group, you might find it interesting that it's also considered to be a top leadership skill, somewhat troublingly coming in ahead of integrity. But, there's that. But it's certainly an important skill. And all of these things really add up to innovation being a number 1 business priority. And it says innovation there, but I want you to be able to, whenever you see innovation, now going into the future, never look at innovation without thinking innovation, parentheses, which comes from creativity. You don't get the one without the other. Now, I don't want to leave us with a bunch of negatives. So why don't we think about what are some bridges? So if we've got barriers, what are some bridges that we can build to get across those barriers? And of course, I defaced Dali's painting and built a little bridge to take us to this next section. I'm sure he'll forgive me. He was a kind of cheeky guy, so I'm certain he would appreciate my cheekiness. Now, when I was just saying innovation, parentheses, which comes from creativity, that's what we really have to move away from. Innovation is not a formula. Innovation comes from creativity, and creativity is messy. Formulas are nice because you're like, oh, cool, formulas, guidelines, I can follow those. Creativity doesn't work like that. I want you to look at this picture of Dali, and I want you to ask yourself, truly in your heart, would you want to manage this guy? It's an uncomfortable thing to think about. We don't like things that don't kind of fit guidelines and formulae and seem easily controllable. But it's absolutely necessary to embrace this messiness of the creative process, because you aren't going to get it from a formula. It just doesn't work that way. I'm going to test you on your rudimentary math skills. You can press your space bar if you don't want to mute yourself. I don't know if you know that Zoom trick that you can just press your space bar to speak and you don't have to unmute yourself. You'll still hear. So What is half of 13? I don't hear anybody. I know you guys.
6.5.
6.5. That's a great answer. Everybody who agrees with that, raise your hand. Okay. It's an excellent answer. But I would suggest to you that it's not the only answer. If we push on this a little bit, what are some other ways that you might say something is half of 13? What is something else that might be half of 13?
1 and 3.
A 1 and a 3. If you look at the number together, if you took the 1, that's half. If you take the 3, that's another half. What if you looked at the word 13? What's half of it?
13.
13, that's half. What if you took a line, a horizontal line, and you bisected 13? Then what would half of 13 be? So if I took a line and I put it right here, then half of 13 would be 17. And another half would be I backwards C, which is an old Roman numeral. So there's actually a lot of answers to the question, what is half of 13? But we're so locked in sometimes to the Sudoku mindset that we don't go there. And this is not really our fault, because almost all of your education past 3rd grade is dedicated to making you think in a Sudoku mindset. You know, if you think about all the standardized testing that you've done, and that includes for people who went on to do SATs, GREs, LSATs. Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Think about any of you who have kids, think about what would happen if your kid was asked in class, what's half of 13? And they said, well, one way to see that would be 17. A lot of teachers would probably not be like, yes, that's so creative, go you. They would be like, okay, remedial math, that's for you. So it's something that we're gonna need to try to embrace, this idea that there can be more than one answer. And far from being confined to just art, creativity is something that is everywhere across all sets of professions. Doctors, lawyers, IT, scientists, professors, everybody has to be creative. And I'd like to we already talked about the definition for creativity, but why don't we talk about the definition for a creative challenge? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that they solve creative challenges every day. People think, oh, creative challenges, that's coming up with the next great product or the next great process. And those are certainly creative challenges. But a creative challenge is simply any problem to which there is no right answer. So you can't look it up at the back, you can't look it up on Google, you can't, look at the odd numbers at the back of the book. It's a problem to which there is no one right answer. And that could be something as simple as, where are we going to go on vacation in 2021? What am I going to wear today? Oh, my kid missed the school bus. How am I going to get them to school now? Those are all creative challenges because there's no right answer to those things. You have to come up with them on the fly. Creativity can also be enhanced. And that's something I work with a lot with people here at the museum, is thinking about how we can improve people's creative thinking capacities. You are not one of those glasses. You have to have what education scholar Carol Dweck calls growth mindset. Because when people believe that they have a limited amount of something, whether that be intelligence or creativity, they get locked into a lower performance level than if they believe that their intelligence or their creativity or whatever quality can grow and change over time. Then we have better performance over time. And creativity is not magic, it's science. And this is really important because we still have this idea with us that creativity is somehow an inspiration that we get out of the blue, like a magic bolt. It's as if creativity is something outside of us instead of something that is inside of us. And this is really memorialized in words that we have. I work in a museum, which is a place where you house the works of the muse. who supposedly inspired the ancient poets. Or I bet a lot of you enjoy listening to music. Or maybe you like to be amused. So we have a lot of words in our culture that really kind of capture this idea that we believe that creative productions come from some force outside of ourselves. But the truth is, it's much more like Archimedes, who had a problem, which was weighing this crown. And he thought about the problem really hard, but as usual, how many of you have ever solved a really hard problem sitting at your desk? Yeah. Desks are not for creative thinking. Desks are for productive activity. We solve problems in the shower or driving to work or taking a walk or running on the treadmill. That's where we solve problems. And Archimedes, typical of us, solved it in the bath. Because even though his brain didn't realize at the conscious level he was still working on the problem, at the unconscious level, he was still working on the problem. And with the stimulus of the bath, boom, in his head, the idea came to him. But it wasn't magic, and it didn't happen outside of him. It happened inside of him because of the scientific principle of incubation. So if you ever get a hard problem, stop thinking about it, walk away. Go take a shower, go take a walk, go take a drive. And finally, creative ideas are not original. They're combinative and associative. So just like this Nike waffle trainer that you see here, the person who came up with the Nike waffle trainer was a coach for track. And there was a problem of different surfaces. So you have the normal turf surface, but then you also have the artificial surface. And you can't run on the artificial surface with the traditional turf cleats. So he worried over this problem. How do I design a cleat that's not a cleat? How can we have a cleat that's not a cleat? And finally, one day his wife was making waffles. Incubation, bingo, there's the idea. So, unplugs the waffle maker, takes it out to his garage, throws some polyurethane in there, bakes a polyurethane waffle, cuts it up, makes a prototype, voila. But it wasn't original. Yeah, waffles and running shoes existed, and for very excellent sanitary reasons had never been put together before. But, they came together in a really awesome way. So I'd like for us to use this idea of building bridges as a way to think about how cognitive preferences might be useful for us. Because, hopefully you can practice some of these mindsets. So being more open to creativity being messy, or believing in your own ability to change and grow with creativity, with embracing the fact that creativity is not original. But it really helps if you can have something more solid to hang those mindsets on. And so I'd like to introduce you to this idea of cognitive preferences as the bridge. So we're not using the instrument that I normally use with teams and organizations that come in, but we're using the principles from that instrument. So if you want a more scientific assessment of this, I have the profiles, but we're going to think about this in a more theoretical way today. And foresight asks a really important question. Instead of asking kind of the question that we always ask, which is the wrong one, which is, how creative are you? Like we always like, oh, how creative are you? How creative are you? Well, not very creative. We want to ask a different question. How are you creative? Because we're all creative. And that's really what this gets to the heart of. So a lot of times when I tell people that I teach creative thinking, they're like, oh yeah, brainstorming, ideation. And I'm like, well, that's a part of it, but it's only one part of it. And if you look at this process, this is the actual universal creative problem solving process that we all go through. And I don't say that because, oh, I'm a creativity and innovation practitioner and I'm telling you this is how you're supposed to do it. No, creativity and innovation scholars have observed people and written about it for over 60 years now. And so this is a very descriptive rendition of how we solve problems. So first we clarify the challenge. That is, we think about, okay, what is the problem? This is where we research and we get data and we ask questions. Then the second stage is where we generate ideas. This is customarily people conflate all creative thinking into just this second stage, which is where you brainstorm and try to come up with ideas for how you might solve that problem. And then the third stage is development, where you take these ideas and you kick the tires, you make a prototype, you test things out to see how they go. And then implementing is where you actually make stuff happen. You do it. You do the thing that you have come up with in your process. And if we kind of looked at it like this, I like this more circular model instead of the linear one, because a lot of times when you're in a creative process, you don't necessarily start at the same place every time. So for example, I might not start at clarify because I might already know what the problem is. I might start at ideate. Or I might get to implementation and figure out something doesn't work, and then I might have to backtrack. So I really want you to think of it as a circular idea. So one of the things about cognitive preference that's really important to understand is that preference is not the same thing as ability. And you shouldn't confuse those two things. So to give you just a sense of what that means, why don't everybody, I want you to raise your dominant hand. Whatever your dominant hand is. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw everyone through the Zoom camera a make-believe can of spray paint. And as soon as I throw that can of spray paint through your camera, you're going to grab it, and then you are going to, as fast as you can, write your name in cursive. Okay? With your dominant hand. Okay? Go. Okay. How did that feel? Anybody can press their space bar and pipe in. I see a thumbs up. Yeah, thumbs up. For most people, it should feel natural, normal, like it, you know, the normal thing that it always does. Okay, now I want you to take that can of spray paint and I want you to toss it into your non-dominant hand. And I want you to do the same thing. I want you to write your name in cursive. Okay, how did that feel? Okay. Awkward, probably, and probably had to think about it. That's the difference between when we think about cognitive preferences in the creative process, that's the difference between preference and ability. When you are working in the area of your preference, it's like writing with your dominant hand. It just flows and you don't think about it. But when you're working in an area that's not your preference, it feels like writing with your non-dominant hand. Now, you can do it. And actually, if you did it over and over again over time, you'd actually get pretty good at it. And that's why preference isn't the same as ability. And I want you to kind of keep that in your mind going forward. I don't want people to say, oh, I'm bad at development. No, you have a low preference for development. That's not the same thing. Now, why would we want to do this? And this is where I want you to think about the idea of how this connects to the theme of empowerment. Creative thinking is an inherently empowering activity. For one, just as we looked at with the idea of the muse versus the idea of Archimedes, once we realize that creative thinking is not something that is external to us, it's actually internal to us, that in itself is empowering. But it's also something where we can grow and learn. And once we learn to go through this process more mindfully, then we start to have better results. So research actually shows us that creative thinking is universal, that every one of those steps has mental skills, that we as individuals have thinking preferences, and we gain and lose energy. But by mindfully managing those and being aware, that's where we get empowered, because we can gain self-mastery of our own creative process. We can grow empathy for other people who don't share our same preferences, which is hugely important when you work in teams and organizations. You leverage diversity, which is something we talked about at the outset with our sponsors, how cognitive diversity is something that's often very overlooked in teams. And by doing so, we'll improve our performance. So this is going to be a kind of meeting of this is the process, and we know that this is the process that people go through. But then every individual goes through that in a different way. And so that Venn diagram, the magic part, is where you personally intersect with the process. And that's hopefully we're going to uncover that for you guys today. So I want to start with clarifiers. Now, as we go through this, what I'd like for you to do, you have your little piece of paper and you have your pen or pencil. And what I'd like for you to do at each of these sections, as I'm describing these things, I want you to ask yourself, does this sound like me? And kind of note that as we're going along, okay? So clarifiers are people who enjoy looking at the problem. They enjoy investigating problems. They enjoy doing lots of research. You know, clarifiers are like 3rd and 4th page Google searchers. You know, they're not like happy with what's on the first page. They're digging and digging and digging. They like to ask tons of questions. Why this? Why that? I need to know the history of this. And they're not really excited about moving forward on a problem if they don't have all the information. Now, if we think about this in terms of their cognitive preference, you would probably find that the way that they think about problems is very focused and orderly, very organized thinkers. If you work with somebody like this, or you are this person, the needs of this person are to have order, the facts, an understanding of history. They need permission to ask questions. And then obviously all thinking preferences have upsides and downsides. And so this thinking preference tends to annoy people by asking what others perceive as being too many questions, or pointing out obstacles, because their clarifiers are very analytical thinkers. And so they're kind of like playing chess ahead, and they're like, oh, that'll never work because 3 steps down the road, this will fail. And a lot of people, for some strange reason, don't like that. They also tend to overload people with information. So if you are a clarifier or you know a clarifier, they might be the person who writes paragraphed emails, where they lay out all the context for something before they ask you at the end, can you do that for me? You're like, why didn't you just ask me to do it? But they thought you needed to understand why. And the watch out for this cognitive preference is that they can fall into analysis paralysis. That is, they can get caught in the loop of analyzing something so much that they won't move forward with the next steps of the process. And this can be a real issue. And that's really what I meant when I said gain self-mastery. So if you have a high clarifying preference, you don't have to get stuck in analysis paralysis. What you need to know is, when am I starting to go down the rabbit hole with my preference and pull myself back? Yeah. As soon as I hear myself say the words, I need to read one more book, I'm like, okay, no, you've gone too far. So you just got to know that for yourself. Now, just in case it hasn't become clear to you yet, if you are a high clarifier, I just want you to look at these, because these are common things that clarifiers say. These are some verbal clues from clarifiers. This is from some unpublished work by an academic colleague of mine. So give me all the facts. Are you sure? Can we justify that? What's the main purpose? What do you mean? I don't want any surprises. When did this happen? Is there any research? So just to be clear, to clarify, those are things that clarifiers say. Okay, now it's time for you to admit, okay? So if you hover over the top of your screen, you should get a little toolbar that comes down and lets you open an annotating tool. For some of you, that might be in the more. There's a little thing that says more. And for some of you, it might be in your pull down where it says view. Can people see their annotating tools? No? Okay, well, I'm not gonna worry if,
We could use reactions.
yeah, we can use reactions. So, or maybe we can have people drop it in the chat. Why don't we have people drop it in the chat? So everybody open their chat again. And I would like for you guys to write in everybody who thinks that they are a thumbs up for clarifier, which means you think, yes, that is so me. I want you to just type yes into the chat. If you think, yes, that's so me. Okay. If you are more of, we won't worry about that for the sake of this workshop. But let's try to get the lows in here. People who are like, oh my God, that is the opposite of what I would do. If I hear research, I run the other way. When people ask questions, it pisses me off. Just, hell no, I love it. Okay, so we have a little bit of both sides kind of going here. We have quite a few people who consider themselves to be clarifiers and some people who consider themselves not to be clarifiers. If you are a clarifier, you will probably see this working out in your process as you solve problems. You'll really, when you're given a creative challenge, you're going to really enjoy the front end work. You're going to enjoy like digging in and doing the research. And then you're going to lose energy after that part of the work is done. And just to leave you with a little funny for clarifiers, this is my clarifier meme. People feel this way about clarifiers a lot. I have a lot of sympathy because clarification is one of my preferences. So now let's think about ideators. Now, ideators tend to be in contrast to clarifiers. Clarifiers are like in the weeds, details people. Ideators are big picture. They're very imaginative. They like to think about all of the possibilities. The clarifiers want to be, oh, what's the problem? And the ideators are like, problem? I don't need problems. I got ideas. I got all the ideas. So if you're thinking about what the ideators tend to think like in their process, they tend to be very playful thinkers, very imaginative, super adaptable and flexible, tend to be really adventurous. So if you know an ideator, one of the things I want you to think about is these preferences do not just show themselves in your work life. That's a huge mistake that people think, and it's not true. Your cognitive preference will show in every part of your life. So an ideator will go on vacation very differently than a clarifier. So if you're an ideator, you might go on vacation like this. You're like, next week I'd like to go somewhere. Where might I go? Okay, buy a ticket. Okay, I arrived. Let me drop my bag at the hotel, walk out the door and see what I find. Whereas a clarifier would have bought that ticket months ago. They'd have a guidebook. They would know the opening and closing times of all the museums and all the sites and things they wanted to see and have those underlined. Very different way of looking at the world. Now, obviously, ideators also have a watch out. And one of their big watch outs is that they can overlook details. So for example, I knew an ideator once who came up with this great idea for a university project, did the whole project, and then realized that that wasn't the topic. But it was a great project. If you are an ideator or if you work with them, the needs of ideators are room to be playful, a lot of stimulation, variety and change. They don't like to do the same things over and over again. They like to have a constantly changing array of things that they can ideate about, of things that they can kind of jump on. Now, they tend to annoy other people on occasion because they draw attention to themselves. Ideators tend to be very larger than life personalities. And they can be impatient when others don't get their ideas. They're like, well, what do you mean you don't get it? It's amazing. And offering ideas that for other people might seem to be off the wall or too abstract. And then, occasionally, you'll have an ideator who, in addition to maybe overlooking details, sometimes ideators don't stick to one idea. If you talk to an ideator on a Friday, they're like, oh my God, I have this amazing idea. And then you talk to the ideator the next Tuesday and you're like, so what happened to that idea? And they're like, oh, that's so last week. I'm on to something new now. That's not untypical. So if you're still not sure if that sounds like you, let's take a look at some of the verbal clues of the ideator. I'll come up with something. Let's try it a different way just to see. Spare me the details. Just give me the drift, the big picture. I had a dream. That's one of my favorite ones. The sky's the limit. What if? Those are some of the verbal clues of the ideator. So the tail of the tape, as they like to say in boxing. Let's see, who do we have here? Let's go back to the chat. Who do we have here who is going to say, yes, I'm definitely an ideator? Yeah, I have some people already. Ideating all the time. Yes, yes. Okay. And some people I've noticed they're saying things like, I feel like I'm balanced, or yes, but I do like research sometimes. Some things, I can't get into the full complexity of foresight in a short workshop like this, but there are people with multiple preferences, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. For now, I'm kind of just going for the gist. I'm being very ideator-like. Now, what about people who feel like they are definitely, oh my God, this is not me. When the Post-it notes come out, I run away. They hate to brainstorm. They'd rather be poked in the eye with a sharp stick than have to go into a room and strategize and brainstorm about the next great idea. Nobody's going to admit to being a low ideator. There's no shame in it. Remember, they're preferences. There's no good or bad. So one of my favorite ideator images, this is a Shel Silverstein cartoon. You got these two figures who are shackled to the wall. And then, now here's my plan. Because that's how an ideator thinks. Like, there's no situation that grave that it can't be gotten out of. They will find a way. They will find a way. Now, developers. Developers are really interesting because developers, like clarifiers, are very analytical. But unlike clarifiers, their attention is not directed to the problem. Their attention is directed to the solution. So after the ideation session, when you've got all the ideas are not solutions. Ideas have to become solutions by kicking the tires, by prototyping, by improving, by perfecting. And that's where developers are like in their jam. They're like, oh, okay, let's make the pros and cons list. Let's run all of these tests. Let's prototype it. Let's, do some rapid prototyping again and again and again. Let's iterate on this idea. That's what they love. If you've ever seen the movie The Founder, there's this great scene where in order to come up with the McDonald's service system, they take the whole kitchen crew out to a tennis court and they tape off the tennis court as if it were the McDonald's restaurant. And literally the guy runs them through scenario until they finally get the ordering and delivery of the food down to 30 seconds. That's a developer. When you think about how developers think, they tend to be really reflective, careful, pragmatic, planful, patient thinkers. And that's probably not surprising because it takes a long time to develop. Develop is a painstaking process to perfect something, to make it great. And if you are a developer or you work with developers, they need that time to craft and develop ideas. You probably work with a developer if you have somebody on your team or you work with somebody who says, I need more time. I need to go over it one more time. I need to polish it a little bit before I turn it in. I just need to go over it. Those are very developer type things. And they can annoy other people with their thinking preference because they can be very nitpicky, because remember, they're perfectionists. They like things to actually work. And by finding flaws in other people's ideas. And then their watch out, of course, is they can get very into that perfecting cycle so that they don't see that there might be other ways to go about it, because like, no, make it better, make it better, make it better. And they can get locked into that. If you're still not sure if you're a developer, these are some of the verbal clues. Can we make it better? Pros and cons. Let's weigh all the options. Can we test it? This isn't ready. This is good, but I think it could be better. Let's do a cost benefit. Those are all very developer things to say. So why don't we hop on our chat and let's see what we have in this room. And I will be honest with you, developers are the least common thinking preference as a high preference. Stick a hot needle in my eye. I love it. A lot of people feel that way about developing. Diana says, after I clarify, I develop. Actually, there is a multiple preference that's high clarify, high develop. They're called analysts. Very common in IT, actually, and in engineering. Ain't nobody got time for that. Yeah, that's a very common thing. I think I relate to this the most. So I'm a web developer, and yeah, developing is very, it's a more common preference in computer related professions, or a lot of times also engineering. There's a lot of interesting research on cognitive preferences and professions. So if we're gonna leave developers with a meme here, and I can sympathize with this, even though I'm not a high development preference. I do sympathize with this idea of they'd rather just not do it at all than do something crappy. And that's how developers customarily think. And then finally, we have implementers. And implementers are actually the most common preference. So developers are the least common preference. Implementers are the most common single preference. And implementers are the Nike of preferences. Just do it. Just do it. And that's why we have our image of the person just jumping and letting go, because that's the only way you can implement. There are no tools for implementing. Implementing, you just do it. You make the thing happen. There are post-mortem tools that are very useful for implementers, where you reflect on what you've done. But that's for another day. Now, implementers in their thinking tend to be super persistent, decisive, determined, assertive. They're very action-oriented. And their watch out is that they can leap into action too quickly. So for example, the aim, they got the ready, fire, aim thing going sometimes. And you might have wanted to aim before you did that. But that's a typical implementer. If you are an implementer, or if you work with one, the needs tend to be the sense that other people are moving just as quickly. It's not uncommon for an implementer to send an email and then 5 minutes later show up at your desk. What's going on? What could you possibly have going on that you couldn't have already answered my email in the 5 minutes since I've sent it? Because they really like that sense that other people are moving just as quickly as they are. I work for an implementer, and I learned very early on in my tenure here that he and I had a different idea of what I need this soon means. For him, I need this soon meant tomorrow. And for me, it used to have a very different meaning. They also like to get control of a project. They like to be in control. And that leads to the annoys others. Implementers can often annoy others by being what is perceived as being pushy. I have literally in my life seen implementers hip check people out of the way so that they can just do something themselves because they want it done so badly. And they readily express frustration when other people don't move as quickly as they do. Now, if you're not sure if you're an implementer yet, let's look at some of these verbal clues. Take it or leave it. Let's do it. I don't have time for this. Enough questions. What's the bottom line? It'll work, trust me. Maybe, maybe not. I've worked with a lot of implementers. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Okay, let's open the chat and see what we've got going on up here. Take action, all about this. Implementer for things I love. Okay, oh yeah, that's me. I annoy so many people. I thought I was an ideator, but I'm for sure an implementer. I love it. Okay, and anybody who's like, no way, it's not me. Okay, awesome. And of course, we have to have our implementer meme. And of course, I've never met an implementer who doesn't believe that they are the middle door, the department of people who actually make things happen. That's what they think and feel. So you also, and some of you have started to notice as you're looking at these, that you feel drawn to more than one. And there are people who have multiple preferences. It's very uncommon. About each of these multiple preferences usually grabs about 1% to 2% of the population. But here are some of the potential combinations. So, you know, we have people who are high clarifiers or high developers. We talked about analysts before. Drivers, the one on the left at the bottom, high ideator, high implementer. This is a very common CEO profile. This profile is what I like to call, get an idea, make it happen. Get an idea, make it happen. Then there's the accelerator, who's high clarify, high implementer. And that, I like to call that profile, figure out what the problem is, do something about it. They don't necessarily stop in the middle to come up with all the ideas or to make all the ideas as good as they can be, but they figure out what's wrong and they do something about it. So these are the multiple preferences, and there are also 3 preference profiles, and there also is one called the integrator. That's the one at the bottom. And that's where you don't actually have any high preferences. You feel pretty even across the whole entire process. So to end today, I really want to talk about the amplifications of this. And the amplifications of this are, okay, that's very interesting. And hopefully you can use some of that to think about how you might better manage yourself. But I want to kind of turn outwards for a second. And I want to think about how you might use foresight in your organizations. So as I said, we're not doing the strictly scientific version today because I haven't administered the profile to you. But just to think about some of the things that could be done if you do that. So before we get into this first activity where I'm going to be sending you guys to breakout rooms, and you're only going to be there for about 3 minutes, but you're going to go to the breakout room that matches where you feel the most at home. So those of you who feel like you're multiple preferences, you're going to go to the place where you feel most at home. And I kind of boiled it down here to 4 needs. If you're a high clarifier, the most important thing to you is to get things right. You need things to be right. If you're an ideator, the most important thing to you is that something is different. If you're doing the same thing, why bother? If you're a developer, the most important thing to you is to make things perfect. And if you're an implementer, the most important thing to you is to just get things done. Okay? So are we ready to send people to the breakout rooms? What you're going to do is you are going to pick the room that is your high preference. So if you're a clarifier, go to clarifier room. If you're an ideator, go to ideator room. If you're a developer, go to developer room. And if you're an implementer, go to implementer room. And in the room, you're going to have 2 questions over these 3 minutes. 2 simple questions. 1, what does your preference bring to a team? So if you're the clarifiers, what do you clarifiers bring to a team? And the second is, what preference is the most annoying for you to have to work with when you have to collaborate? Okay? So why don't we send people to breakout rooms for 3 minutes and then we'll reconvene here to wrap it up. I know we still have some people coming back in from the breakouts, but I think we got most everybody. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of a feel for not only how you might think about foresight in terms of your own process, but how you might think about foresight in terms of how you might grow empathy and understanding for other people that you're working with. So if you think about what preferences are difficult for you to work with and you think about why, then you start to feel and understand how you might negotiate ways that you could collaborate together more effectively. So if I'm with my implementer colleagues and I'm a clarifier and they're trying to push me along faster than I want to go, then we might have that conversation. Or if I'm with my ideator colleagues and I'm a developer, I might not want them constantly throwing new ideas at me when I'm already trying to develop the old ideas. But you can start to think about how you might craft conversations so that you could actually move your team forward instead of letting these things kind of sit below the surface of people disagreeing and having friction, but not understanding why. Understanding cognitive preferences helps you understand why you have that friction and how you might manage it more effectively. And the other thing that you can think about if you're thinking about these profiles is if you take your organization as a whole, you can start to see that your organization also has a profile. So these are two anonymized profiles of organizations that I've worked with. So this organization, I can tell you, is going to be very good at figuring out what the problem is and very good at doing something about it. But they are probably going to latch onto the first idea that they come up with. And that could be a big problem because maybe it's not the best idea. So they're going to want to think really mindfully about how they structure their process so that they build in time and energy for this part of the process. And then this is another profile, just to give you an idea of a different organization. And they're really good at figuring out what the problem is and making things better. But they don't have a lot of energy for ideation or for implementation. So they're going to want to, again, think about how they might manage their creative process so that they can get the best results. So if I had to sum it up for you, I would say on a personal level and on a team level and on an organizational level, knowing what your preference is doesn't give you permission to skip steps. To solve a creative challenge, you have to clarify, you have to ideate, you have to develop, and you have to implement. And just because I don't have high energy for it doesn't mean I get to not do it or get to say, oh, I'll let my colleague do it who's an implementer. No, we all do all of it. We just gain and lose energy. And obviously you need to build your teams how you always have built your teams, which is based on skill, but you can use cognitive preferences to guide and adjust your teams. And as with most things, you need to see gaps, not as limitations, but as opportunities to strengthen and grow. And I will leave it there with you. And I hope that this was helpful in understanding a little bit more about creativity and how we might think about it in a different way. And I'm only 5 minutes over, which for me is really good because my time management's terrible.
No, you did an amazing job. Thank you so very much. And I just have to echo one thing for some of the people on the call. Creativity as a hiring principle has always been huge for me, And I think it's probably the most important talent set that somebody can have. When you're creative, you can figure out a way to solve a problem, right? And that's what we do. We solve problems for our clients. So thank you so much. I had so much fun. I keep looking at my drawing of the sunset and I'm like sort of embarrassed. And at the same time, it was a lot of fun. So I appreciate it very much. So thank you so much to Dr. Kim Macuare, whose name I have now learned how to say. She is co-director of Innovation Labs and director of community programming at the Dali Museum, which we are very pleased to have in St. Petersburg, right down the street from our office. Also to Lynn Heckler, the Chief Talent Officer at PSCU. Thank you for your sponsorship. Maria Del Carmen Ramos, Partner, Immigration Practice, Co-Administrator and Co-Chair, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Shoemaker. Teresa Bursey, Executive Director, Branch Manager for UBS in St. Petersburg, Florida, and also a implementator. She was in my room, so I was not surprised by the people who were in my breakout session. And Scott Daigle, Regional VP, Tampa Bay with TD Bank. We appreciate you all very much and your sponsorship and the ability to deliver this program to our audience and some really cool content that they wouldn't have gotten elsewhere and through a partnership with the Dali that we hope continues. So thank you all. If you want to stay on, if you want to ask questions, if you want to continue the conversation, we'll stay on with you for a little bit. If you want to jump off, that's okay too. Sorry, we went over a little bit. We don't normally do that, but we did a little bit this time. So it's up to you what happens next. But we appreciate you being here. We appreciate our sponsors, and we appreciate you, Dr. Kim. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. And, as usual, I know a lot of people are jumping off, but, if you liked it and, other people who are doing things that are really subpar in terms of their team building, their team engagement, their professional development, their leadership retreats, and other things like that, then, they have a better option. #VDali.